Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is the Efficiency Equation podcast. And to tell you the truth, we had something different in mind for today, but we're looking at what might possibly become the biggest disruption to the US economy ever since we've had a US economy. So, as you will know, a lot of ports are going on strike as of today throughout the United States. And Konstantin and Eugene told me, guys, we just can't go on and carry on with the show as we would have normally. So we have decided to take this issue and dive deep into it from a manufacturing perspective, from a shipping perspective, how it impacts our clients, how it might impact you. Yeah, so we have nothing scripted, nothing pre-planned for this episode. We're just going to take it from here. So I want to welcome you to the show, Konstantin and Eugene. What is going on in the United States, in our ports right now?
So thank you for having us. I just wanted to say that as of last night, ILA, the union that has all these port workers from the northeast of the United States, from the state of Maine down to Gulf Coast to Texas, went on strike as they couldn't reach the agreement with USMX, the Association of Shippers that deals with the collective bargaining agreement with them. And what this means for us is that half, if not more than half, of the United States is paralyzed right now in terms of the shipping ports and the shipping capabilities. There are certain things we know and certain details we don't know. So we have to be transparent about this. Everything we know is strictly from public information from the press and online sources. So we know that there are two major sticking points, that they could not agree on the wage increases. That's number one. And the second one is that ILA is demanding complete ban on automation at the ports. And there's mention of the cranes and forklifts and all sorts of docking facilities. And we don't have all the details of their demands spelled out, because on the websites they just mentioned this, but it's not like we're looking at their actual proposed contract. So just want to be clear. But from what these people are saying and what the people on the ground say when they put up the banners, they are demanding complete automation ban. And in terms of wages, it's understandable. This is more traditional with any such strikes with any unions, that over time they want raises. Here they're talking about how the association that's dealing with it offered them a 50% increase in wages and they shut it down. And they want 77% increase. And some people might think, oh, wow, that's high. Well, they're actually explaining that 77% increase is to include the effect of the recent inflation, because they've been hit by inflation and they feel like they didn't have fair compensation for that. So I cannot speak to the fairness or unfairness of the wage component of this. This is between them to figure it out. Of course, we can talk about how anyway, whatever that number is, it's going to translate down to the U.S. manufacturers and to retailers who are impacted by this. That we can talk about. But the part about the automation ban, that is just crazy. So I'll say it. And this is something that reminds me of the candle makers when the light bulb was invented. The industry wants protection, but we have the automation. It's here. And we have other ports that are competing with us. So by trying to set back the industry, you're just making the country less competitive. So we can talk about that.
Yeah. Eugene, do you have a take on this, like out of the gate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree that we can't really speak to the fairness of the situation with the pay for the workers, because we're not in the industry. We don't know many things to be able to fairly present that picture. But on the automation side, it's really down to the balance. And it seems like there might be afraid of the automation as people are afraid of AI these days, some people at least, right? And you can say, well, there's some fear that can be justified, that, yeah, there's certain risks involved with all of this, but it's inevitable. The automation is here, and it will be here to stay, and it will continue to evolve into being even smarter and better. Same with AI, and it's hard to see how they will be able to put a stop on it or outright ban it. I'm not sure if they are trying to completely ban it. Maybe. I haven't seen the actual language from them in terms of the demands on the automation. What I've seen has been reported in the news is that they want to put stronger language into contracts with the union that would limit the automation in certain places. And I don't know if it's complete outright ban, but even limitations are hard to do, because what does that mean? That means the throughput, for example, will suffer, right? Because there's only so much that people can do, right, within their workday. Obviously, automation can work nonstop, and potentially the bandwidth of things going through the automated shipping lines and docking machines and everything, the bandwidth is much bigger. You can put more things through than a person can do. Obviously, for the businesses involved in either shipping the goods or being the shippers or receivers of the goods, they would prefer most things to be automated, so that the throughput is higher while the cost potentially is lower. But again, we're not saying that we're against people that want to have jobs. We understand that everybody needs to have jobs. That's you can't have a job and an automated workplace that has been automated away. So if your job is to check trucks at the gate, right, and you have an automatic check-in for the truckers, for trucks to arrive and be checked in, then obviously the guy who is doing the check-in at the gate is no longer needed.
Yeah. Can you guys speak to what is being automated at ports for those of us who are not intimately familiar with the machinery and the cranes and everything else at ports? Because, when most people think of ports, it's not a super high-tech place. And you would assume that cranes and some automation has been in place since the 1910s or the 1920s in U.S. ports. So what exactly is it that is of interest to us when it comes to automation?
Yeah, this is a very good question, because as I think about what automation brings, I think that we're again stuck in our old mindset that, if I'm a forklift driver and they automate the job of carrying containers from one spot to another, then I'm eliminated. Well, let's look at the ports in other countries. So if you actually go and search the web right now for the most automated port in the world, you'll see that Shanghai port in China is the most automated one. And you can actually see what they have automated. So yes, they have automated guided vehicles that are used to load, unload, and transport the containers. So that you can immediately draw a parallel with the drivers, the operators that actually deliver those containers within the port today, right? They have automated cranes. They have connectivity everywhere. So the tracking of containers on site at the port is also automated, right? And if you look at the port of Dubai in United Arab Emirates, they have automated the storage of containers. So they have these facilities where they can pick up a container and put it away for storage without using a lot of manual labor. To a degree, here and there, there's still manual labor, but then look at how many people they employ. They still employ a lot of people, all of those ports. So what does that mean? That means that the people that yesterday were just the forklift drivers got retrained to do something else. And that's important. That's proof there. These facilities that I'm talking about, they're not lights out facilities that are completely unmanned and just operating autonomously. No, they're not. There are people controlling all of this stuff. All I'm saying is that they have to then accept the idea that you have to train again and take on a more advanced role at the port. And that's what those countries are showing us. So if we are going to enforce these artificial obstacles to growth and development, well, then the other countries are going to take over. Now, you can say, okay, in the United States, if we just block off all the ports and demand the same conditions everywhere, we are able to sort of force everybody's hand into accepting our terms. Well, we have neighbors, right? We have Canada in the north, and Montreal Port Authority is one of the smarter port facilities that is looking into more innovation and automation. So, of course, Canada has its own labor disputes and everything that comes with it. But this is something people don't think about when they twist everybody's arm behind their back like this, that we're just going to demand this. Well, if you demand this, and the economy will find other ways to grow around it. So this is not sustainable for sure. But to go back to your question, all those automation jobs, while they go away as an entity, they are basically replaced by other jobs with greater responsibility, something that's more advanced. So the workers need training. As long as they go through training and continuously educate themselves, there's always something to do, because those large ports abroad, they actually employ a lot of people. So that's the dynamic I'm seeing that people aren't getting. They're stuck in the past.
I think the key thing that you mentioned, that is, it's almost a law of nature that the economy will find a way around these bottlenecks. So if you artificially create a bottleneck, money and goods and everything else is gonna, of course, it may be disrupted temporarily, but it's gonna find its way around. So what this actually leads to is, if you artificially impose a barrier on your own operations and you're making yourself less competitive, in the long run, you're actually going to endanger those jobs which you are trying to protect by stopping automation. So as you mentioned, if Montreal is going to become more competitive, then, it's going to, divert the traffic. Everybody's going to divert the traffic there because it's going to make more economic sense. And then port workers will end up having problems anyway because of that. If not because of automation, then because of this.
Yes, and people at ports like Montreal are going to be happy for a time because they're going to get all this additional business until they realize that they need an increase in wages, and they do something similar when everything shifts back to the United States. But one thing that's not funny in all this is the cost component. So let's just talk a little bit about the $5 billion a day price tag. This is what all the news sources are estimating right now, that for each day of this strike, the US economy is losing $5 billion. And we can talk about how that translates to manufacturers and to retailers, but since we are focused on helping manufacturing sites, that's more important to our work here. And we mentioned shipping companies coming up with ways to pass on the costs down to manufacturers. What do you think the manufacturers are going to do when they realize that they're stuck with this for a while?
It's the same as with tariffs. You put extra tariffs on. It's the same thing here. You put extra price on shipping on the items. It's going to flow right back down to the consumer's pockets. It's going to help prices go up.
Exactly.
The manufacturers are not going to get stuck paying the bill. I mean, they will be at the moment of the bill, but they'll happily pass it right on down to the consumers.
Yes, and then we're going to be back where we started, because when that catches up, the economy catches up and the consumer ends up paying the bill, the same workers that started the strike are going to wonder how come the inflation is back there, because it will be seen as inflation impacting their ability to buy groceries at the store, because a lot of stuff is imported. Maybe that particular brand of chicken that you're buying is not imported, but the machinery to make it, to process it, may be imported. So the packaging may be imported. There's a lot of stuff in the supply chain that when you disrupt it, you end up paying the bill in the end. It just takes some time to catch up, but that's the part that a lot of people just don't see. You walk out there demanding this complete ban on automation and you stop all production in the country eventually, not right away, because for a few weeks they still have some inventory of raw materials. But if you make this long enough, then you end up paying for it in the end. You spread it with other people, but you still pay because there will be consequence, and your food will be more expensive at the store at the end of the day.
We're going to get right into what manufacturers and plant managers can do to stay more competitive despite of all of this. But before that, I want to ask you guys, are you worried that this might trickle down into other areas of the economy, of industry, of manufacturing? What I'm talking about is, some workers or other unions in other areas of the economy might think to themselves, look, the port guys, port workers, they got it good, at least for a while. They got a big wage increase. They were able to kick out automation, at least in part from the ports. So why don't we go on strike? Do you see this as a threat?
Well, strikes happen all the time, and not because people just looking at each other and say, oh, look, the Johnsons got it, so let's go get it as well. I don't think that actually is the driving force, because if you think about it, all of these strikes are usually used, or not used, but usually staged by unions, right? So there are contracts in place. It's collective bargaining, which is quite widespread in many countries, including in this United States. So it's really down to what is in your contract and whether or not you think that you can actually get anywhere by striking, right? So I don't think they will just say, oh, look, the dockers did it, so let's go and strike. No, it's not quite like that, but it's not a first strike, right? There were other strikes, not necessarily by the dock workers, but in other industries there were other strikes, and sometimes they're not very successful, but sometimes they are. It really is case by case basis, and depends on what the strikers demand. I wouldn't think that it's a domino effect necessarily. We have these strikes now and again in different industries, so there could be another one a few months down the road. Who knows? It's hard to predict.
Yes, I think with how the collective bargaining agreements work, it's not right away that this could have a domino effect, but it might. It might. And the more people decide to strong arm the economy and say, well, I'm going to prevent all your operations and disrupt your livelihood until I get my way, the more all of them are going to end up picking up the cost, like I said before, because in the end, they don't realize that the gain is very short term. And in the long term, everybody is smart. They'll find a way to share the burden with the rest, and they'll pass it on back to you. So we're all in it together in the economy. And so when people do something disruptive like this, they end up bearing the burden of this as well.
Well, in this podcast, we're very problem-oriented, or solution-oriented, rather. And this wouldn't be the efficiency equation if we didn't look into the possible solutions that this situation brings about. And what I'm talking about is the very obvious situation is that upstream, you're going to be incurring costs. By the way, do you have any information about, what sort of negotiations are going on between manufacturers and shipping companies right now?
No, not yet, because the shipping companies are just beginning to roll out this kind of concept with the port disruption charge. Not everybody has made that clear that they're going to do that yet. But even Maersk, when they came up with this, I think they're changing the date when that is going to be effective. Because when I searched for that this morning, I saw some older articles saying that that was going to go in effect like 3 weeks into October. And then there's another spot already saying that it's going to go into effect right away. So they might be accelerating the timeline when those fees are going to be passed down to the manufacturers. But there's another one important side to all this. It's that the manufacturers are paying the market price for the delivery of their cargo. And what I've seen this morning is that by this morning, the average cost to ship a container into United States has already increased 6 times. And they were giving the number how in the last several months it was around $5,000. Now it's $30,000 for one container. So think about this. You have manufacturers, and we're working with some of those manufacturers that have operations that depend on this supply chain from other parts of the world to deliver certain ingredients, certain raw materials. And they have their profit margins baked in. And those profit margins, you'll be surprised, may or may not be very high depending on the volume of the product, the type of industry where this is. So now if you disrupt it so strongly, and already the cost to bring this in might be way too high to make this product profitable, they're going to stop making that product, at least in the short term. And what does that do? Well, that changes the whole setup for the manufacturer. Now they have to come up with the other products that they're going to sell. And maybe if they have a large portfolio, they're going to weather that just fine. But then downstream, so these are business to business operations, right? They are making this and they're selling it to another manufacturer who uses now their product as an ingredient. Well, they're not going to get that. So it creates a ripple effect. And now you have all these, in the food industry, you have these chocolate factories, all these bakeries, the soft drink processing facilities. They're not going to get the ingredient they expect. They're going to get something else, some kind of substitute. That substitute may be close or it might not be close. And then everybody goes through this adjustment and it costs money everywhere. So then as a result of that adjustment, the prices are higher. So that's something that's very important for people to realize, that it all has a ripple effect, because these costs, they don't just get eaten by one entity and then they say, oh, okay, we got it and you don't worry about it. No, they pass it down. Everything gets passed down eventually. It's just a matter of timing.
Right. And the question that you asked, if the manufacturers were doing anything about it, as far as we know, they have been, because the strike was announced early on. So it wasn't a surprise for anyone that it's going to happen. I mean, nobody knew if it's going to actually happen, but people were, banking on it happening rather than not. And a lot of manufacturers did stock up. So they did move a lot of goods into the US before the strike happened, right? Before today, in preparation, especially knowing that we have lots of holidays coming up, right? We have the Thanksgiving holiday, then we have Christmas after that. So most manufacturers and retailers are able to predict what type of goods they will need over this period of time, so they can try and pre-purchase them, basically stock up on those goods so that they can have less of an impact during these seasons, the holiday seasons. So they did that. A lot of them that did that. But as Konstantin said, the cost of shipping has increased before the strike, right? Well, one of the reasons it increased is because everybody was trying to ship more, right? And obviously you have limited throughput. So the more you're trying to ship through the same pipeline, the higher going to be the cost. So obviously you kind of creating the crisis by the fact that a crisis is coming. So you're starting to create it ahead of time by trying to prepare yourself by purchasing goods ahead of time. Of course, that only works with goods that are non-perishable, something that can stay in your warehouse for a long time. And maybe this type of goods is not really vital for anything, like, okay, gifts, okay, some, appliances you can potentially put off buying or whatever. But then there are a whole bunch of perishable goods. And that is even a bigger problem in this case, because first of all, you can't store them for a long time. So you cannot prepare ahead of time by too far out, because they're just going to perish, right? Food is specifically affected by that, right? So you have to be very smart about what you can do. So some manufacturers obviously are looking at potential other shipping routes. And I'm not talking necessarily by shipping by airplanes or some other methods that are not sea, but they're looking at potentially shipping to the ports, like you said, maybe in Canada, or shipping to the ports that are not part of this Texas all the way up to Maine line, but maybe shipping it on the other side of the states and then transporting from there overland. So there are other ways that you can try and go around it. They all cost money, but the problem with this is that with perishable goods, you are in a situation where you might not be able to prepare yourself by storing stuff. You have to buy it close to the point of use or point of sale. So you just can't store a lot and just say, okay, we're going to ride this out by using our reserves in the warehouse. Just not going to happen.
But it's interesting. You mentioned the West Coast, and then you ask the question: can this be something that other people look at and decide, oh, we're going to do this too? So I would think naturally that guys on the West Coast are the ones looking and thinking, okay, now let's see how the East Coast stuff goes, and we can do the same exact thing. And people in California will tell you that they would definitely benefit from the wage increases because, by the way, a gallon of gas, when you want to fill up your engine with your tank, it costs like $6 in some of the areas around San Francisco in the Bay Area. So much more expensive than what it is on the East Coast. So there's always something that they could spend their money on. One of the things I've been thinking about, as you asked about companies preparing and manufacturers specifically, it's like, yes, all these things come to mind that take longer than a few weeks. And I'm hoping that in a few weeks, this strike will be over, that they'll come to their senses and somebody will step in and end this fiasco. But we actually don't know. We know that in the sports scene, we've had strikes that lasted several months. So this is not sports though, and there are more people who depend on this, more livelihoods involved. So I'm thinking that they'll resolve it faster. But as I think about it, these kinds of situations, they are a reminder for the manufacturers to get their things in order that they might not even be thinking that aren't in order. And this is where we get into the technology solutions. So you have this topic I wrote about in the LinkedIn post this morning, that simple things like once you get this raw material on site, so I'm talking about manufacturing site, not the port now. Once you get it there, you need to move it quickly in order to minimize the costs associated with the delays and with having it in the system for too long. So we all know that the shorter cycle time benefits the manufacturer. But yet, not all of these containers that you get in are easy to handle quickly. And so as we think about all the different technology solutions, we could say, okay, if you get this standard box container that most of us see stacked many levels high on the cargo ships, if you get that, those containers have standardized markings on their side that tell you what that is. And now there are different ways, different technologies to track those when they get on site for you. You could stick RFID tags on them and then have multiple RFID readers installed across the perimeter of your manufacturing site that would tell you in real time where that asset is. And it's great. And other issues, other interference issues, yes. So now as you start to think, well, how do I make it work smoothly? Well, then it turns out you actually need to stick more than one RFID tag on the container, and you stick it on the other side. And who does the sticking? It's the people that are walking around. So you still have some manual labor involved. It's not completely automated. And you would think, okay, can there be something more efficient? Yes, you have the AI cameras. And the AI cameras can see a certain area, can detect the marking on the container, and send the information to a computer system saying, okay, I have that particular container in this particular spot right now. That's all great. It works much more easily and much better than the RFID tags when it works. There's a caveat, as always. If you have very, very bad weather, which we've had lots of lately, and you have very strong storms, and the rain is such that there is no visibility several feet away, then these cameras will not detect anything. If there's rain pouring into the oculars, they will not detect anything. So then you're still dependent on having some plan B, whether that's sending out the guys to identify what's out there or just pause the operations while the weather is crazy. But what I'm getting to is that this is a perfect time to think for all these plant managers what they can do better. And they can basically come out with a successful mix of solutions where there is part automated and part manual labor, but the manual labor component needs to be disciplined. There needs to be efficiency in the process so that you can shorten the cycle time and everybody is happy. Now, from the workers' perspective, they should not feel threatened by that, because if the manufacturer is shortening the cycle time, that just means there's going to be more flow of these products, more work. It's not like the work goes away. So if the work goes away, that means you need to get educated, trained for a more complicated job, and then you'll be okay. But as far as this preparation goes, going back to the technology, yes, there are lots of opportunities for manufacturers to investigate. They might take longer to implement than the current strike, but the strike should be a wake-up call for them to actually get things in order, because the ones that don't do anything, they're going to be caught unaware again, and they actually might not even make it to the next strike. This reality isn't a choice. Do we make our operations more efficient? Do we invest into technology? This is more like, yeah, the other competitors of yours are investing already, so you either keep up with the technological progress or you go extinct.
I wanted to add a couple of things because we talked about what's at the table when they are asking for changes, right? Two main factors, right? The salaries, the wages, and the automation. I'm not even sure which one of them is higher on the list for the particular strike here. Maybe automation. I don't know. But do you remember there was this strike recently enough, almost 150 days it lasted, of the screenwriters in Hollywood. So there was this strike. The main concern of that strike wasn't wages, although royalties and things like that, they were part of the things that they were talking about, part of the negotiations. Yes. So there's almost always some financial variable in these strikes that the people want to negotiate on. But one of the major issues was AI. That was the, I say, cornerstone of that strike. And it lasted almost 150 days. That's a lot. That's almost 5 months, right? And they were able to get a lot of concessions. And the new language of the agreements that they have really goes deep into limiting the use of AI in trying to replace the screenwriters or the actors. They got a lot of concessions on that. So when we talked about the automation ban in the ports, I just want to say that even though it may look like, well, who wants to ban automation? Automation's great, right? You have much bigger throughput, potentially higher accuracy of stuff. Well, it depends on how resilient they are with the strike. They may actually get their wish. So it's not clear as to the outcome of this. They may actually say that, you know what, okay, we're going to limit automation just because we have to keep going. We can't keep you striking for that long. So it really depends on the resiliency of the people on strike. If recent history is any teacher in this, then 5 months of striking, and they pretty much banned AI in that industry. So there you go. That's just an example of what happened recently, because you were talking about this, Dan. Like, can one lead to the other? Well, if you look at this and you say, oh, that was the example set for the dock workers, could be. Who knows?
I also want to throw in some interesting numbers as we talk about automation taking the jobs away. Of course, take it with a grain of salt. The ports have different sizes, but it shows you on the order of magnitude what we're talking about. So the port of New York and New Jersey, according to the online data, employs about 8,000 people. Now, I looked at the more automated ports. The port of Dubai, it employs over 108,000 people. 8 versus 108,000. And it's more automated. And then when we look at the port of Shanghai, it says over 50,000 people. Port of Shanghai being the most automated in the world, there are some websites saying that it employs only 400 people. The 400 people is only a small section of it. But then when you actually start to look into more detail, no, 400 people cannot operate a huge port like that. That goes to reinforce my point that if the port workers think about getting trained and getting more advanced jobs, there will still be jobs with the automation. You have a pretty decent sized port in New York area, and then you have Port of Dubai. And there's 100,000 more people working there, even though they have much more automation. So I think when you put things into perspective like that, the automation demand should drop off, but then again, like Eugene said, they hold out long enough, we don't know what the result is going to be.
Yeah, one last question. No, actually, next to the last question is, Eugene, you talked at length about just some of the things that have to be rearranged now that so many things are changing because of this bottleneck upstream. So you talked about, potentially needing to get different components and ingredients and changing shipping lines. Well, from the plant managers and plant directors' point of view, this is a lot of operational and logistical difficulty. Let's just put it that way. It's a bunch of additional work that is not adding to productivity, that is not adding to bottom lines, that is not adding to customer satisfaction. Now, do you anticipate that while these manufacturing plants are experiencing these difficulties, that this will be a push to digitalize more of their operations and to just give a push to digital transformation? You knew we were going to get to this question, right, in this podcast. Do you expect a lot of new clients knocking on your door saying, we need manufacturing execution systems because it's already been a nightmare on spreadsheets and paper, but now with these new changes and disruption, this is beginning to be unbearable?
In the meantime, right now, while this is going on, no, I don't think so. I think that right now it's more going to be like let's tighten our belts and try to survive this and try to find ways through this by, like you said, either changing shipping lanes or trying to get stuff from other ways or changing components, if that is even a choice. In the long run, after this is over, yeah, it could lead to additional interest in saying, okay, how can we be prepared better for anything like this in the future? It doesn't have to be dock workers. What if it's the captains of the ships? Right? Next, like, what are you going to do? So it could be anything, right? There are so many different gears in this mechanism of logistics. So if you want to be better prepared for the future and potential uncertainties that can come up, then yeah, the more you have your hand on the pulse, which obviously is the whole goal of digital transformation and making sure that you are as digital as possible, because then you have the knowledge, you have the precision of what's going on in your company, and you can have better decisions that make you more effective. The better off you are. So whenever something comes up like this, right? So yes, in the long run, I could see how this could push some of the manufacturers that have been waiting in the wings and saying, maybe we can get by with whatever we have, with paper, with Excel, to start thinking that maybe we're going to be better prepared if we have much more visibility into our business. And digital transformation will give you that, obviously. That's what my take is on this. I don't think it's going to be right now, but in the long term, yeah, could have a positive effect.
I totally agree with Eugene. Right now, it's going to be our mission to make these manufacturers aware that they need to basically rescue themselves. They need to think about what it is that they can do better, take initiative and make it better so that the next time when something like this happens, they are better prepared. Nobody is coming to rescue you. You have to take matters into your own hands. How can you make things better? Well, Dan asked about digital transformation. With digital transformation, you treat data as your precious commodity, and you have the constant control of what you have going on right now. You know where you have what you have and what's happening to it. And that's very precious, because now when you have all these adverse events, you can react much faster than those manufacturers that don't have that. So this is a perfect opportunity for me to make a shameless plug here and say that we're going to be at the Prove It 2025 conference in February in Dallas, Texas, that is organized by 4.0 Solutions, spearheaded by Walker Reynolds. And we're going to be working there and showing what can be done to help the manufacturers get better at doing things and be better prepared for things like this, in particular, in the future.
Great. That's an awesome way to end it, I think. Well, we're not ending this conversation because it's going to be going on. And I think it's only the beginning because, you were disrupted now by port workers, by something upstream in the supply chain, but it's only a matter of time until the next disruption comes. And it can be another strike. It can be a pandemic. It can be weather. It can be new technology. It can be a new competitor, components, ingredients, whatever. So it's just a matter of fact that disruption is going to be happening, and your best bet is to be prepared and be agile.
Yeah, and we just had all those things that you listed, right? We had the pandemic, we're having the weather, we have emergency declarations in multiple states down south with complete devastation there from the Hurricane Helene. All these things, if you want to be prepared for it, unless it's happening to you, right? If you are in the actual path of the hurricane, the only preparedness you can do is to, hunker down or evacuate so that you being safe with yourself. But if you are not in the actual weather, you can be affected by it because your business is going to be disrupted, right? The shipping lanes, again, the transportation. I mean, there are roads flooded or washed away completely. There are like no roads, impassable. It's just, it's devastating. So while we feel for all the people that are affected, here we're talking about the efficiency of businesses. Obviously, the businesses that are not prepared to deal with such adverse events are going to be affected more.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode, which was episode 15 of the Efficiency Equation podcast. Thank you for sticking around. Leave a rating, comment, like this episode, subscribe, and join the conversation on LinkedIn on Konstantin's profile. And we will see you in the next episodes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.